So good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Welcome to the Riverwood Conservancy's webinar, Red Fox, Surviving the Coyote with Dave Taylor. My name is Stephanie. I'm the Community Program Coordinator at the Riverwood Conservancy. I hope everyone is having a lovely evening. And just letting you know right now, there's construction going on right above me. So if you hear some weird noises, that's what that is. I want to say a special thanks to Credit Valley Conservation for supporting all of the work that we have done. And before we get started, I just want to mention that all of our July and August programs are now live on our website, so you can register for as many programs as you would like. On your screen now, you should see our entire calendar of events. This one is from July, and then we also have all of August events up there as well. Anything highlighted in yellow are programs that are coming up and are open to join. We are easing our way back into in-person events that adhere to public health guidelines, and we'll be offering outdoor yoga, meditation, and forest bathing events through July to September. Spaces are limited, so please register for as many sessions as you would like at the riverwoodconservancy.org/events. And if you would like to support our virtual and on-site programs and conservation of Riverwood's habitat and wildlife, please consider donating on our website. We would greatly appreciate any sort of contribution you can make. And before we get to our speaker tonight, the Riverwood Conservancy would like to acknowledge that the land on which we operate is the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, Wendat, and Haudenosaunee nations. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this place is still home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. And tonight we have Dave Taylor again, who is our wildlife photographer and an author of more than 40 books on wildlife and ecology. His most recent book, Black Bears, A Natural History, 2nd edition, is available now. Dave also focuses his efforts on producing educational videos and material about wildlife for both the public and to support school curriculum. He has traveled throughout the world capturing nature with his camera, and he frequently visits Tanzania, where he guides wildlife safaris. Dave taught science and geography for more than 30 years and nature photography at Humber College for more than 25 years. And today he is a consultant for the Riverwood Conservancy. So if you have any questions during the presentation for Dave this evening, please type them in the Q&A section and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. And Dave, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and welcome everybody. Tonight's topic is about the red fox and surviving the coyote. And we'll talk a little bit about the coyote, but mostly it's going to be about red fox. And where I live in Mississauga, it seems like everybody has been seeing red fox except me. And that's a good sign. And it's also a factor of the fact that I'm not seeing because I'm busy writing my next book and doing photography other places than Mississauga. But I keep hoping I'll see one. So we're going to start out with a short video on red fox. It's called The Hunting Lesson. It's on my YouTube channel, and Stephanie will be posting the link to this as well. So I'm going to start by sharing the screen. Those of you that are familiar with this process know that if anybody can mess this up, I can mess this up, but we're going to try. And share sound. I got to remember to do that. That's a new one for me. Here we go. And Stephanie, you'll tell me if you're not seeing it.
We can see it.
Good. So that is the red fox. And if you look at that video, a couple things are going to strike you. First of all, I think one of the things that strikes me is what a beautiful looking animal it is. It's definitely a dog. It has all the characteristics of a dog, but there's something extra special about it. So let's take a look at the red fox a little closer through a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to share. And this one I will narrate. So I call this presentation Red Fox, the Cat-like Canine. And that's with good reason. Just get to the point where we're going to move it. The red fox looks like a dog, and it is a member of the canine family. It's a distant relative of wolves and your own dog. But it is also a very cat-like hunter. Now, in North America, particularly in Ontario, let's just talk about Ontario foxes. We have 3 fox species. We have the Arctic fox, which is known to be the white one. And a very interesting dynamic has developed between the red fox and the Arctic fox. With climate warming, red fox are expanding their range. They're moving further north, and they're moving into the territory once held by the Arctic fox. The Arctic fox is actually a smaller species of fox, and red fox have been known to prey on the Arctic fox. In fact, there was a very dramatic picture published a few years ago of a red fox carrying away a half-eaten carcass of an Arctic fox. Arctic foxes, you would expect them to be white, but in fact, they're not always white. This is more of a winter coloration or a far north coloration. They are also kind of gray, and they will turn gray, most of them, in the summer. Now, we do have another fox that's really rare in Ontario, and that is the gray fox. It is the only really tree climbing fox that we have. Gray foxes are known to climb trees. They're pretty much arboreal in some ways. They're a little bit smaller than the red fox, but not much. They're very rare in southern Ontario, but they are found here, particularly in southern Ontario. I have only heard of one report of a gray fox anywhere near the Mississauga area, and that was a fox that was seen out in Oakville, and it may very well not have been a gray fox. The red fox comes in many colors. This is a cross fox. This was one that we used to have at Riverwood that was quite used to having people around. We would see it quite often. So you can see the darker coloration than in the fox in the first photograph or the video. The video one was a true red fox. They come in blonde. There are black foxes, and in breeding programs, they've even managed to breed a white version of the red fox, and occasionally they get away. But if you're going to see a fox in this area, it's most likely to be either a silvery color, a red color, or fairly black. This is another example of a cross fox. For the fox, mating season begins in the winter. Male and female start to pair up. They start to look for a den. They're going to find a place where they can raise their young. They probably have more than one den. The youngsters, these ones are very, very blonde. This was up in Algonquin Park, just off the highway. This den was photographed in Clairville and was the first fox den that I ever saw. So this picture was taken 40, 50 years ago. This one was in the backyard of my sister's apartment building in Etobicoke. This one was in Alaska. But wherever you find them, they are red foxes. And this one was underneath a building that was being reconstructed to become part of Humber College down at the lakeshore. There are no foxes there now. There haven't been for a number of years. But there was a time when red foxes were almost a sure sight. Now, I have heard there's been a red fox down there last winter. Red fox kits grow up. They spend they're born around April. They spend most of actually late March and April. By the end of April, they start to come out. And this is something that I've seen happen so many times. There's got to be some biological rationale for it. But red fox kits are often shown off to people by their parents, by mother in particular. I have had on several occasions red foxes nurse their kits within a few meters of me, and one time right at my feet. Totally fearless. And yet if I went back in July or August, I wouldn't even see the fox, let alone the kits. And if I did get a quick glimpse of them, it was exactly that, a very quick glimpse, because they would run off. Mothers are very caring of their young. Both parents will feed them. And once the youngsters are old enough to move out of the den, they start to scatter. And it is when they're in the den that they are most vulnerable to coyote predation. I told you we had red foxes at Riverwood. They used to be, back when I started in 2003, pretty common. By 2007, we could count on taking classes out to see red foxes almost. In fact, I did that on a couple of occasions. And then things changed. Coyotes came in. Now, if you've seen other presentations I've done, you'll know that wolves hate coyotes and coyotes hate foxes because they view each other as competition. Wolf prey on larger mammals and some of the smaller animals. Coyotes can occasionally take a larger mammal, but prefer birds and smaller mammals. And red foxes are pretty much limited to smaller mammals. So wolves don't bother too much with red foxes. They don't really hunt them down, but coyotes, being in the middle, they tend to see the red fox as a competitor. So we've had fox dens disappeared. In fact, a few years ago, this is the den at Visual Arts Mississauga. It was right outside the executive director's office at the time. And she was watching the fox kits and she was enjoying them. And then one day she saw a coyote come around. Well, the coyote was chased off by the executive director. But the next day, tragedy had struck and there were no more red fox kits here. I did hear later on that the red fox had managed to move the den, or at least another red fox had a den about 200, 300 meters away in an industrial area, probably more like half a kilometer away. Red foxes can habituate to people. So one of the things I'm bound to be asked, if you see a red fox, what you should do? Well, I would say bask in the glory of seeing it. I guess it was 2 years ago, they did a kill virus for rabies. They dropped all over Mississauga a rabies vaccine that predators like skunks and red foxes would pick up, that pretty much has eliminated rabies from the fox. Foxes do get diseases, and you'll see a picture of one later on. But if you see a fox in your area, don't feed it, because you don't want to habituate these animals to the point where they become tame. That's pretty much guaranteeing that they're going to get hit by a car. You want to leave them fairly wild. But if you see them walking down the street, you don't need to panic. You don't need to call wildlife control. They're not going to bother you. A fox that's out in the day used to be a sign of something unusual. But these days, foxes are so common in some places that you're bound to see them. And apparently everybody's bound to see them except me. This is my friend Gary Hall. We got quite close to a fox on a number of occasions, to the point where it almost became boring taking pictures of it, at least for some of us. One of us never got bored of it. This is a red fox with mange. Mange is a periodic disease that comes up. It hits coyotes, it hits foxes. There is a cycle, particularly with coyotes, where you'll get a lot of coyotes and then mange will hit and the coyotes will die off, and then the foxes seem to come back a little bit. I do not think that's what's happening this year, and I will talk about that theory in a minute or two. This fox is molting. It's also hunting. This is up in Alaska in Denali National Park. It's after sick, or what they call in Alaska an Arctic ground squirrel. Sick is more of a Canadian Inuit name for it. You can see the ground squirrel down in the left-hand corner. The fox will make a quick charge at it. In this case, the squirrel got away, but in this case, the squirrel didn't. So foxes are definitely hunters, and they're very cat-like hunters. They're not like coyotes or wolves. They don't chase their prey a lot. They tend to stalk their prey. They tend to be ambush hunters. This one is carrying these ground squirrels back to its den. Foxes are always on the move. They can cover several kilometers in a day. So the fox that you see or that you heard might have been at so-and-so's street this morning, might in fact be several kilometers away by the afternoon. It depends where the prey is. Now, if you're feeding birds and you've got squirrels coming in, you might also be feeding red fox and coyotes for that matter. They're constantly on the move looking for food, and they're omnivores. Unlike most predators, like you think of wolves, you think of meat eating, you think of polar bears, think of meat eating. Foxes tend to be more like black bears. They will eat a variety of food. In fact, in some places, most of their diet isn't animal matter, it's plant matter. This one has got an egg. This is in Yellowstone. It stole an egg of a bird, and as I watched it, it carried it quite some distance, and then suddenly it wasn't carrying it anymore. And what it had done, it had cached it. It had hidden it away so that other foxes, other predators wouldn't find it. This was something it would use later on. You find foxes up in the mountains, you find them down in Florida. They have a really wide range. And when they're hunting, they're a delight to hunt. They stalk using their ears, almost like radar. They're locating it by twitching their ears back and forth. And when they lock into something, they'll go down, and then suddenly they'll pounce, often landing what looks like flat on their head. It's particularly funny when they dive into snow, because sometimes the only part of them showing us is the tip of their tail. And I'd love to see it. Now this fox, look at what it's got in its mouth. It's got snowshoe hare. It's got a couple of mice. I think there's a vole in there as well. Now, he didn't get all of those at one time. What the fox had done is he would make a kill, leave it someplace, cache it, go off, make another kill, cache it, make another one, cache it. And then when he's finished his hunt, the fox comes back, he grabs all of the prey that he's captured and carries it back to the den. He looks pretty proud, I think. As I said, foxes are stalkers. And when they leap quickly. Now, I didn't have a clue what this one was leaping after, but suddenly out came, I think it was a snipe, and it got away. This happened at Riverwood one day. And if you've seen other talks, you've probably seen this before. What's different about this particular version of it is I'm showing both the foxes. The male and female were out hunting, and two geese were out looking for a nest. This was a spring morning, and I happened to drive around the corner, and there was this drama unfolding. Well, it became a camera, of course. I was pretty excited. Now, the fox had a problem. The geese had obviously seen it, and his bride, she knew right away that there was no hope, so she left. Women are sometimes smarter than males, sometimes. That was the male goose, by the way, that came forward to face the fox down. Well, now this fox has got a pretty clever thing. He starts to troll the geese. He starts to play like he's not interested. He lies down. He rolls around. He looks off in this direction and that direction. And the geese, being not the brightest birds, they decide, well, this fox isn't a threat, and they wander off. And that's when the fox attacked. Now, the fox came down really quickly, and he grabbed the male goose, which was a mistake. He grabbed it by the tail feathers. There's not a lot of meat in the tail feathers of a goose, but there's a lot of muscle behind these goose. And that gander turned on that fox, and then the female came in, and the two of them, well, he was one sorry fox. All he had was a couple of feathers in his mouth, and he watched as two geese walked back across the road. They didn't fly, they walked, which was just adding insult to injury for this poor, poor guy. Watching foxes hunt is one of my great delights. I've enjoyed it many times. They are really beautiful to see them leap. They're sleek animals when they're healthy. They're beautifully colored. This is an older fox. You can see it's got a few miles on it. And these are younger foxes. So younger foxes tend to disperse. Now, sometimes a female will stay with the den and help out next year. And there's advantages to that. Even though she's not breeding, she is getting the advantage of living with her parents. She's helping another generation, which obviously share her genetics. So that's a good thing. Male foxes tend to disperse by the end of the summer. And this is when most of these foxes die. They're hit crossing the roads. Coyotes get them. Even owls, large owls will take these young kits. But if they're lucky and they survive, they might move as far as 100 kilometers from their den site. Some of them become resident, and those foxes generally know how to get along with people. And if you're seeing foxes in your neighborhood, you're probably dealing with an older pair that's fairly resident, that know how to behave and are not going to be a problem for you. These are a couple of young foxes. These are the two that were in the video. Come winter, this is the hardest time for foxes. They tend to hunt mostly early in the morning, late in the day, but in the winter they may see them out hunting during the day because they're getting desperate, especially when snow crusts over, they can't get through it. So it's tougher on them. But when the snow crusts over, the voles can't breathe. So they have to make these little holes to get air in, and sometimes that gives the fox an advantage. So there we go. That's going to end that. And now I just want to talk a little bit about what I think is happening in Mississauga. The number of fox sightings have encouraged me to give some thought to what's going on. And I have to go back to the experiences I've had in Yellowstone with wolves and coyotes to come up with a possible explanation. Yellowstone introduced wolves back in 1995, I think it was 94. And the coyote population, none of them had seen a wolf for like 75 years, suddenly had this alpha predator in their midst. And the coyote population plummeted. They lost at least half the coyotes in a particular area. And I have pictures, and I've shared them with you in other talks, of wolves digging out coyote dens, killing the coyotes. Well, that looked like for a number of years, that's the way it was going to stay. But recent research that's just been published in a wonderful book called Yellowstone Wolves talks about the resurgence of the coyotes. The coyotes have learned to live with wolves. They've learned to how to adjust their behavior to the wolf pattern. The other thing that's been really interesting, and I'm doing a research for another book, and I came across a really interesting story about bears, and I've seen this in Yellowstone too. Some bears, particularly female bears, grizzly bears in Yellowstone, have learned that if they go around where people are hanging out, like the roadways, the highways, not campsites, there's less likelihood that male bears are going to show up there. And male bears are predators on young grizzly bears. And the theory is that there are these sanctuary areas that the bears are starting to figure out where they can go to be safe from grizzlies or wolves or whatever the predators are. And we think maybe that's what's happening with the coyotes. And maybe that's what's happening with red foxes. But there's a problem with that theory. The coyote in Mississauga is so habituated in some areas to people that coyotes seem to be everywhere. I mean, they've been on my street. But at the same time, we had a coyote on my street a year or two ago, had a red fox in my backyard, which I didn't see. Somebody's video caught it. And it was hunting squirrels. And then people have been reporting red foxes all around Mississauga and probably in Toronto. So something's going on. Either the red foxes have learned how to live with coyotes, or, and this is a possibility, the coyote population has declined because of this yearly or this several year cycle of distemper or mange or whatever that's come into them. I don't really know the answer. I don't think anybody knows the answer, but there is a dynamic that has changed. It may be that the fox has learned it can den up in people's backyards. And certainly I've heard from people, and I've seen in other places, foxes denning in the middle of people's backyards. And I don't know of any coyotes that have been so brazen, unless you happen to have a very large backyard, which would have to be very large. And I don't think you would want coyotes denning in your backyard. Now, we've had coyotes den very close to buildings at Riverwood, but those buildings aren't occupied, and they were living in the forest, and the coyote den was one of 4 or 5 dens that, had they been disturbed, they would have moved. So it may be that the red foxes have learned how to live with people, have learned how to adapt and use us as a safety net against the coyotes. I don't know. I'm going to be watching this over the next year or two and see what happens. And I'll be asking questions and talking to people, and maybe we'll be able to come up with some definitive answers. But it has really surprised me that people have been seeing so many foxes, and this started just this year. And I don't think it's a COVID factor. I don't think it's because people are home more. I think it's because there are really more foxes around. And there's certainly a lot of sightings of coyotes. Our local neighborhood network reports coyotes, skunks, foxes, at least on a weekly basis. So I'm not sure what's going on. One other thing to talk about from red foxes before I take questions, and that is this myth that the red foxes that we have in North America got augmented by British fox hunters bringing foxes over. So the theory goes that back in the 1700s and 1800s, the British, Great Britain fox hunters who loved to chase the fox on horses imported a number of foxes into North America, and these foxes augmented the fox population and bred with them, and we got this hybrid. The red fox is found around the world. It has got I think pretty much the widest distribution of any large carnivore. It's found in Eurasia, Africa, Northern Africa, North America, Mexico, I think a little bit in South America, and has been introduced in Australia, where it is considered one of the worst pests, because Australian small mammals, marsupials, had no concept of what a red fox was and had no idea what to deal with it. So it has decimated some populations, and there's real control measures being put in. It is not found in Antarctica. And there are differences. The red fox that I've seen in Great Britain on my travels, to me, is an uglier fox. It's more like that older fox that I showed you in the picture. They seem to have more of a pronounced forehead, and they are, in fact, a subspecies of the red fox. If you're looking for a good book on red foxes, I would highly recommend this one, The Hidden World of the Red Fox. It's a small book, but this woman has done research on foxes all over the world. It is really interesting reading. It's a good story, and it's not just about red fox. Another book that's a bit older was published by a book company called Chapters, no relation to Indigo Chapters. It's called How to Spot a Red Fox. It gives you a lot of information about the red fox and its lifestyle. If you like British publications, this one talks mostly about foxes in Europe, but it's a good read and it has some insights. And the classic, the old book that really goes back to when I was probably 8 years old or 9 years old. This is probably the first book I read on red foxes. It's still got some information. It's a lot of fun to read. By Leonard LaRue III, and it's called The World of the Red Fox. So I'm going to turn it over to you folks to ask me questions, and let's see how we do. You're back, Stephanie. Your mic is off. Not often I get to correct you.
No, that doesn't happen very often, does
Life
it?
is good.
Thanks so much, Dave. That was a great presentation and great footage. That's really awesome. When did you take those videos?
That was the year before COVID.
Okay, they're awesome footage. So we do have lots of questions coming in. One of them from Facebook was Beth, who is asking how many are born at a time?
It varies, but I think 5 is a pretty good average. One den had about 7 kits. A female's going to have a hard time taking care of more than 4 than 5,
Right.
4 or 5 of them. But I have heard, I think I read someplace they can go up to 13. That would be a ridiculous number, and I doubt that most of them would survive.
13.
Yeah, I don't think that happens.
Wow.
I think it's one of those things that somebody saw once. All of those trying to nurse out of one female, I just don't think it's possible. 4, I can see.
Right.
And I've photographed ends of 5, but never more than 5.
Yeah, poor mom if
Yeah.
if there is 13 of them.
Poor dad too, because he's got to feed them meat later on.
Someone else asked, where can you find foxes in Mississauga? And I assume that's kind of a controversial question, right, Dave?
Well, my answer to you is everywhere, because I have heard reports of red foxes across the city.
Right.
So I think red foxes are going to be where you see them. There are people who are probably watching this that could go out their back door and see a red fox as soon as they're finished talking, as soon as the presentation's over. There are other people like me who are surrounded by fox sightings who just haven't been lucky enough to see a fox. The fox that was in my backyard, actually it was my neighbor's backyard, he caught it on his video. I was astounded to see it so close, but I never saw it. My daughter, who doesn't live very far from here, she was driving out her driveway and a fox walked across the road. Another friend was seeing a fox down in Sam Smith in the winter on a regular basis. I never saw it. So there's a bit of luck seeing them. There's also, hard work. I think if I was really, really after foxes, like I've been chasing bald eagles of late, I would have some success, but I'm only one man. I can't do everything. I try. So hopefully I'll get a fox sometime.
Someone said, so in order to tell a gender of red fox, do males have dark fur in some of their body parts while females have orange fur in their body?
No, there's no way that the color really tells you the difference. Male foxes tend to be a little bit more masculine looking, a little bit, but not a lot. They're a bit bigger. If you see the two of them side by side, you can pretty much tell which is which. The only other way is to lift the tail. And if you're that close to a fox, I think you've got other issues that you need to worry about.
Yeah, for sure.
Very sharp teeth. There has been, somebody has bred a domestic version of the fox. And I think that would be a wonderful pet if it's it's basically a pet dog, but it's a fox.
I think I've seen that in Alaska, isn't it? That they
I
have, there's like a bunch of people that have pet foxes.
Yeah, those are pet foxes that they domesticate. This person
Oh,
has gone through and bred foxes for pets, not like you could buy it.
right.
And I think that'd be a delightful pet. Although you must understand that when you're out in the woods and you're walking around and you go and you sniff something that smells like skunk, it's almost always a red fox. Skunks only let go of their distinctive scent when they're threatened. But a red fox, especially during the breeding season, they want to mark their territory. They want to let people know there's a red fox around.
Hmm.
So I've been out many times and smelt what we thought were skunks, and just knew because there was no reason for a skunk to have fired off its weaponry that it had to be a red fox. And sometimes we've been fortunate enough to see the fox. And I've also watched foxes. They're really playful. Many years ago, there were so many fox dens around that I knew about that the BBC Wildlife Unit actually called me and said, can you help us find foxes? Because we can't find any foxes in England. That has changed considerably since then. So I said, yes, I could probably show you 10 different dens. And they said, well, we'll get back to you. And they never did. But I thought it was really interesting that they were having trouble because this book, In World of Fox, was written about her research primarily in Great Britain. And there are foxes everywhere. And it's just amazing how they get so used to living with people. It's quite a story. So that's another little side tidbit on fox.
And there's somebody that actually commented on Facebook, Dave, you'll have to go look. I don't know if you know this person, Enio, but they said, Dave, when you need a hand finding foxes, call me.
I don't know the person, but send me your email through my website, davetaylorwildlife.com.
And then Beth on Facebook also said there was a report of 13 kits in Cambridge by the Grand River last year.
Yeah.
Wow.
It does happen. I think the highest number I've seen reported was 15.
Right.
You got to figure that those 13 kits, if 2 of them make it to adulthood, that'd be pretty good.
Now, would they take in babies from maybe a mom that passed away?
Not likely. Most mothers in the wild, as soon as their babies are born, they lick off the afterbirth, and that imprints the scent on them.
Right.
So I know from the work I did with bear researchers that if they found a cub that was orphaned, or a young cub, they could take it into the den while the mother was still hibernating and give it to her. But otherwise they wouldn't adopt. Now,
right.
There is a famous story in Yellowstone of 2 grizzly bear sisters. They both had cubs of the same age. One of the sisters, they shared the same side of a mountain, but they weren't hanging out together. But one of the sisters was killed by a car. The other sister adopted her sister's cubs. And so she had 5 or 6 cubs for a while. And that was a remarkable feat. And it got written up, and it was a pretty big deal. I don't think all of the cubs survived, but it was an interesting story. But when I was working on the farm at Britannia School Farm, if we had a lamb that was orphaned, it was very difficult to get the other sheep to take that lamb. But there were tricks you could do, like spreading the mother's milk on the backside of that lamb. I think that was one of the things they did, and that would convince the mother that, it had given birth to it. But I doubt, I've never heard of foxes adopting cubs. That's not to say it's not going to happen or hasn't happened. I've just never heard of it.
Right.
Tough questions. Good questions.
They are tough questions. Francine has asked, could the red fox be forced to move to urban areas because of habitat loss, the reason why they are seen more?
red foxes and coyotes both have moved into urban areas because it's safer. Um, we have active hunting regulations in areas outside the city where you can hunt, and foxes and coyotes and are either trapped or hunted. And the reason we have so many coyotes, we have more coyotes in Mississauga and probably therefore more foxes in Mississauga than there are in the farm areas, simply because this is an area where it's safer. Now, one possible counter theory to that is because there are more coyotes here, it may be that there are more foxes moving out of Mississauga into the wilds of the farmland, although I have seen no literature to support that. But if you're looking for a university project, kids, there's one. What are our foxes doing to cope with coyotes? Are they moving back into the wilds of the local farmlands? I don't know the answer to that, but it would be something to consider. It's possible.
And then we have one more question and then a couple comments that I'll bring up after. Okay. Where can you see foxes around the world most often? Are they always considered as species who live in urban ecosystems?
No, I would say that although with the exception of working some of the fox dens in Toronto and Etobicoke and Mississauga, most of the foxes that I've seen in the wild have been in the wild, like truly wild foxes. Algonquin Park is one area that I've seen them, but I've seen them up in Alaska. I've seen them in Newfoundland. I've seen them in Manitoba and out in Alberta and Yellowstone. I've seen them in Scotland. Those are all red foxes. I've seen Arctic fox up in Manitoba along with red fox. And then I've seen other species of fox like bad-eared foxes and gray foxes. Gray fox was down in California. The bad-eared fox was in Africa, and mostly in the wild. Your best chance of seeing foxes are in areas where they get used to people's traffic. So provincial parks, national parks, places where, even conservation areas, where people are around and the foxes get used to them. But your chances of seeing fox in an urban area like Mississauga are pretty good these days. And I'm saying that only based on the number of reports that I've heard in the last 10 months about foxes in this area. It may change. 3 years ago, nobody was seeing fox. So something has altered what's going on. And I really don't know why. I'm looking for theories, but it's been an interesting dynamic. And I would have thought we're seeing more foxes because we're seeing less coyotes, but the coyote sightings are just about as numerous. So it's a mystery. And I like the fact that nature is something we don't fully understand. I think that's what keeps me going back. It's what keeps me writing books, because when I start writing a book, I'll learn stuff that I didn't know about, and it takes me off in other directions. And that process just fascinates me. So anyhow.
There's just a really cool comment on Facebook from Sheila, who said, I live in Northern Ontario, and for the first time, we have 2 young foxes that come every night. They don't bother the raccoons. They're content to stay on the mountain or just in the grass. Love watching them. So that's pretty cool.
That's great.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
From Northern Ontario, we're attracting a wide audience.
I know, which is pretty exciting.
That is.
And then there was just one comment from Julie, Dave, about your Red Fox Talk images and your videos that you supplied the links to. She's just said that the video is unavailable and it's private. Will it be unprivated after this presentation?
It goes public tomorrow. I didn't want it released until I'd done the talk.
Wonderful. So
but it will be available tomorrow morning. I think I'm releasing it at 9 o'clock.
Okay, perfect. So I am just going to post those links in the chat for everyone again, and you can save those links.
The video itself, the Red Fox video with the action, is online. There's 2 versions of it, one with music and one with natural sounds. And the natural sound of that, the sound that you hear the most of, is a raven. And I'll probably get around doing a talk on raven. But that raven was the most incredible bird. it could bark like a dog. And if you've been in Algonquin Park,
Oh yeah.
you might know of this particular raven because it was pretty well known. I don't know if it's still there because it's been a year and a half since I heard it. But I was taping it. The soundtrack is from Algonquin Park, but it's not the soundtrack that I shot with the wolves because my friend Gary kept talking all the way through it. Like, let's go see something else. We had enough of these foxes. And I said, no, Gary, we don't get this opportunity.
Was it the Mizzy Lake Raven by any chance, Dave?
Yes, it was. See, like it's famous.
It is a famous barking raven for sure. Yeah. But one reason why we shouldn't feed animals, right?
Yeah.
Do you have anything final that you'd like to say before we close up for this evening?
One quick thing. I found out yesterday, because Riverwood is sort of opening up, we do have copies of the Black Bear book that I think you can purchase through Brian Packham at Riverwood if you're interested. We did a promotion and we had, when we first launched the book, but it is available there. It's very hard to find it in bookstores. You have to go online to get it. So, you know, if you're interested in the Black Bear book, because we keep talking about it. And I think my next talk is coming up next month, right?
It is. Yes, it is. At the end of next month, I believe.
When's the whale talk?
That's a good question. We need to look at our schedules, Dave.
Yeah, I think it's disappeared. Okay, so thank you everybody for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. I saw some familiar names flash by there. I'm not sure if the Rita and the Jan are people that I have worked with in the past, but if they are, nice to hear from you again. And we'll talk to you very soon, Stephanie. And thank you everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you everyone. And I just posted my email in the chat if anyone's interested in purchasing the Black Bears book. Just get in contact with me and we can work that out for you. And if you have any further questions, you can email me as well and I can forward those to Dave. And Dave, thanks so much for another great presentation.
Thanks to everyone too. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.
Have a good evening.